Hello, and coming up on this week's Green Signals, your railway podcast, Glenfinnan Viaduct. Network Rail talks to us about repairs to the iconic structure on the route of the Jacobite Steam Train. HS2's Old Oak Common station reaches a major milestone, and the head of the project tells us all about it. The government launches its first piece of railway legislation in double quick time, but we ask where the shadow Great British Railways has got to. And train tickets sold by third parties. We speak with the new chair of the Independent Rail Retailers Association about the opportunities and challenges in this sector. So welcome to this week's Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and as ever,
from me, Richard Bowker.
Here to talk trains again. First of all, as usual, thanks to everyone who has left us a super thanks on YouTube this week, and you all are. James Negus, Ian Munday, Stephen Bates, Richard Price. I wonder if he's the one from ORR in days gone by. Chris Exley, the Independent Brig Line Rail Group, who are a frequent giver, so we really appreciate them, and the Upper Redcroft Light Railway. We really do appreciate so many of you contributing to Green Signals with super thanks, so thank you so much.
Thank you indeed. And a worldwide listener map continues to expand as well, Nigel. So
listener
this week,
map, I like that.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? So this week,
maybe we ought to get a graphic done, Richard, and have little flags.
Oh, right, thanks. Yeah, I know who's doing that then. Right, okay.
When I say we.
Yeah, I know, the royal we. Right, anyway, we've heard from Blinky in Christchurch, New Zealand. I think that's our second listener from Christchurch, so that's fantastic.
Maybe they're mates. They could be drinking mates.
Yeah. Marcelo Saliva in Argentina. R.H. Teebs in Buffalo, New York, who told us he'd only just discovered Green Signals. We'd got his attention with trains, but kept it when we started talking about wacky races. That's great. And we also received this great comment from Anthony Powell. I wonder if my 4-year-old is your youngest listener. She does like to sit with me if I'm listening to you on YouTube in the evenings. So, hello to Anthony's daughter, Mary Faye Thomas. If you're listening, you're most welcome.
Mary Faye.
Welcome to Green Signals.
Absolutely. We're open to all.
Absolutely.
So, last week, listeners will recall we discussed some shocking footage released by Network Rail Southern on the rising problem of level crossing abuse. It really had a very big impact, with many of you offering your own viewpoints on what you'd seen and heard. A really common thread was the impact this must have had on drivers of all trains, and we completely agree. It's just too easy to overlook the fact that the poor driver, who witnesses these events from literally a grandstand position, is often very badly affected by all of these things, whether it's near miss or otherwise. So let's all take a moment to recognise the really serious effect that level crossing misuse can have on the individual in the driving seat. More often than not, a father or mother, husband or wife, brother or sister themselves, they are all human. And it must be dreadful. So we salute them all. And thank you to the listeners of Green Signals who made this very point, which we are very happy to amplify. And on to our big story of the week, and it's certainly a big one in terms of its size, sitting 100 feet above the River Finnan on the West Highland Line and spanning 1,000 feet on the most beautiful curve. It's the longest concrete viaduct in Scotland. A £3.4 million project to repair and protect this world-famous route of the Jacobite Steam Train is underway and is now at the stage where rope access technicians, abseilers I think, are working on site. Now, Richard, being so fond of heights, as we all know, was desperate to join the abseilers, but alas, health and safety, not to mention sheer funk and terror.
Thank you for that. There is absolutely no chance. But I did have the chance to have a great chat with Alan Ross. Alan is the Director of Engineering and Asset Management for Network Rail Scotland. And he's visited the site himself personally, obviously. So I got to see some fantastic footage of the work from a very safe distance, i.e. Chippenham. And we're able to share that with you too. So here is my discussion with Alan Ross. It's really interesting. Well, really, really pleased to welcome Alan Ross, the Director of Engineering and Asset Management for Network Rail in Scotland, to Green Signals. Welcome, Alan, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Richard. It's my pleasure.
Just as a sort of introduction to this, just gives an idea of what your role entails and just the scale. I almost can't get my head around the scale of it.
Yeah, I mean, simply put, if it doesn't move in the railway terms, then I'm responsible for it. So be that infrastructure, track, signalling, overhead line, tunnels, structures, earthworks, bridges, you name it. So Scotland, as you've alluded to, Richard, is vast in its geography. I mean, we may not be the biggest and most densely populated in asset terms, but when it comes to scale of geography, it is big. And that's one of our challenges here in Scotland is managing a diverse asset across a large geographical expanse. And of course, there are pockets of Scotland that are pretty remote, pretty extreme from a weather perspective. And our assets have got to function regardless of where they are and what weather's thrown at them. So yeah, a big role and a big nation that is Scotland. And as far as scale, well, annual investments about £420 million thereafter, about 50 or 60 million pounds in civil engineering OPEX management. And then, of course, we've got the maintenance organisation that drives another 200 or so million pounds of expenditure. So a big responsibility, but one I really enjoy.
Fantastic. Let's talk about Glenfinnan Viaduct, obviously, which is the big project that's underway at the moment. I mean, in asset terms, in railway asset terms, I guess it's relatively new. I mean, right at the end of the Victorian era, wasn't it? Possibly even at the beginning of last century. Does that not bring some benefits, actually, that it is relatively new?
Yeah, I mean, it's what, 123 years or so old, pretty young when it comes to some of our structures in Scotland, and certainly a lot younger than some of the structures in other parts of the GB network. But I think what we need to remember is, concrete and the use of concrete, specifically for bridges, was quite an immature means of construction back then. So, so Bob McAlpine, Concrete Bob, as he was more affectionately known, was a pioneer in his field, and I think it's testament to Bob that the Glenfinnan Viaduct and others have stood the test of time. So, yeah, I mean, it has its advantages. I mean, I think one of the main ones was that the actual rock in Scotland, in that particular part of Scotland, was pretty hard to actually quarry out. So concrete was benefit in that means as well. And it was relatively quick to deploy and install. So yeah, young, but it's had its challenges throughout its years, and the work that we're doing at Glenfinnan will see us through decades to come.
One of the stories I've seen, I don't know if this is true or not, or I'm just misremembering, that when it was built, very sadly, really, a horse and cart ended up down one of the piers. Is that just a myth, or is there any truth to that?
Well, it's a good story, but it's the wrong bridge. So
It's the wrong bridge.
it's the wrong
Hey,
bridge, yeah. So it is a long-standing legend that a horse and cart managed to find its way into the piers at Glenfinnan Viaduct, but that's simply not true. Back in the 80s, it was investigated by a Professor Roland Paxton, as I recall, who used a boroscope, which is basically a piece of camera technology, put it into the two largest viaducts, and nothing was found. Further investigation in the early noughties with a local intelligence source more or less led them to another viaduct on the railway, and they used some radar scanning, and lo and behold, they did find the skeletal of a horse and the remains of a cart. So the viaduct was Loch Nan Ovi, if I've got my Gaelic right. So it's actually the place or the location where Bonnie Prince Charlie fled Scotland after the Jacobite rebellion. So that's where the horse and its cart are actually in, not in Glenfinnan.
brilliant. So it's almost true, but well, it's true, but somewhere else. Okay, we'll take that. That's great. So what condition was the before you started these works? What condition was the viaduct in?
Well, the viaduct's in a generally good condition given its age. So the works that we've done is a lot of refurbishment work. So they kind of fall into, I'd probably say, about three or four different buckets, so to speak. So there's the works that we're doing on the piers themselves, the concrete. So there's some spalling, weathering effects, some water leaching. So minor defects that over time, there comes a point when you've got sufficient number of them that you can actually make it economically viable to go in and do a major refurbishment. There's also
Okay.
some work that we're doing to the arches, the refuges, and also some scour prevention work. So the actual River Finnan flows beneath one of the piers, and in Scotland, as it's quite well known now, climate change is affecting our weather patterns more so than other parts of UK and GB and as a wide. So the preventative works, strengthening those piers for the quite extreme flash floods that we do see down the River Finnan is vital work. So it's quite a bucket of activities that we're doing, and all of them together, this is the right time to do them. Makes it more efficient
And
and more effective.
because it's great, is it grade A list? It's the highest level of listing. Presumably that means when you're doing strengthening works at the base of piers, you have to do it in a very sympathetic and presumably approved way.
Yeah, so to be honest, we've had a great working relationship with Highland Council, who are the local authority in that part of Scotland. And we've been working very collaboratively with them to understand how they want the actual bridge to look following the works. And interestingly, today you can fade concrete, you can make it different shades, but they don't want that. They actually want the concrete to go in as it gets deployed and age naturally as the years progress. So every repair, we photograph it, and we send those photographs off to the Highland Council. They look at them and approve them, or ask us to do slight alterations if they see fit. So yeah, I've been working really well with them. We've got some experts from Dundee University helping us with those sympathetic repairs, because it is one of the real iconic structures in Scotland and on Scotland's railway. So it's right and proper that we actually do this work in keeping with its original construction, but recognizing, it is a modern technique we're using and it will age
Yeah.
naturally.
Okay. And is that why you've done the abseiling and the rope work, because that was a more sympathetic way of doing it, or was that just really for efficiency? I must admit, I look at it and I almost can't, just because my well-known fear of heights. But it was the reason that you went for that method, partly preservation reason, or partly because it was just more efficient.
Well, it's a combination of the two. So, I mean, valuing and managing public money, we really need to challenge ourselves on how we do work, when we do work, to make sure we get the greatest bang for our buck. So also, the fact that, the iconic nature of the structure, if we were to put scaffolding up, the view that thousands of people on a daily basis come to see would have been spoiled. So primarily, it's about doing it efficiently. It's about making sure it's safe in the way we do it. So that's where we use trained abseilers. But also in doing it that way, we can be agile. We can manage the work in what is quite a busy part of Scotland. And I visited a couple of weeks ago, and I was amazed just the hordes of tourists who come and to see the steam train pass over
Yeah.
the viaducts and then go again. But you can imagine managing a work site when literally you've got 1,000, 1,500 people just descend and right to Rome. So managing it through abseiling, targeting the works in the way that we're doing it, avoiding the need for scaffolding. Scaffolding erection is pricey, it's costly,
Yeah.
and it's a bit of an eyesore. So it's not a unique treatment the way we're doing Glenfinnan. We did it in the Royal Border Bridge. Our colleagues in Eastern region did it in the Royal Border Bridge last year. So it's an effective, efficient means of doing refurbishment works.
And once they're finished, Alan, I mean, is it, presumably it is quite close to being complete now. So once it's done, how long does that give you before you kind of have to do a similar level of intervention work?
Well, we've planned the work over 18 months, knowing that the
Okay.
biggest unknown is the weather. The weather even in Scotland can be quite extreme in terms of rain, thunderstorms, and also we've got some quite tightly defined times when we can actually operate in the river. We need licenses from SEPA because it's an actual water course for salmon. So there's quite a few constraints around it. So in essence, we're doing the work, we're making good progress. We've got some contingency next year if we need it, if the weather's unkind to us. So we hope to have at least finished this phase by October this year, and we'll come back next year if we need to. Just really depends on the weather.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, look, I'm conscious of time, but just one final question, because you've alluded to it on a number of occasions now. That's climate change. It's getting a lot more challenging. Money is still very tight for the reasons you say. What are the big challenges now in terms of climate change, and how is Network Rail looking to address those?
Well, here in Scotland, I'm also accountable for our climate action and our climate adaptation strategy. So we're targeting it on a number of fronts. First and foremost, making greater use of technology. So what can we glean from technology that we haven't had in our armory in the past? So in Scotland, we have employed 24/7 meteorologists that are in our control. So they're analysing multiple sources of weather patterns on a daily basis, indeed on an hourly basis, and that helps us make the right operational decisions. More so, we're looking at the long-term climate projections and understanding how those projections will affect individual lines of route. So that's taking climate projections down to a very narrow degree, and then understanding how the assets are likely to behave. So this funding cycle, we're spending of the order of about £450 million, strengthening the resilience of our bridges, our drainage systems, our earthworks, as well as our signalling systems and track. The biggest challenge for us is it's getting warmer, but also wetter. And it's the extremes of rainfall, Richard, that present the biggest challenge here for us in Scotland. And that's where a lot of our effort is going in.
And given that prevention is always better than cure, but the problem with prevention, it sometimes means spending more upfront to save downstream. Do you have the funding necessary to be able to adopt a preventative strategy for some of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, let's be brutally honest. Scotland's railway is well funded. The Scottish government are real avid supporters of the rail network in Scotland. So it's about making that money work the best that it can for us. So targeting in on the assets that are most vulnerable, and being vulnerable having the biggest potential impact on train services. We're in the business of moving people and freight, and people in freight, whilst they recognise the extremes of the weather, they expect the rail to run. So that's where my focus with my team is, understanding those vulnerabilities and making sure we can spend the money that we've been gifted wisely, recognising that Scotland's a big network and we've got a lot of places that are facing extremes of climate change.
Brilliant. Well, I'm sure you live by the mantra of expecting the unexpected with something that is so complex, big. But listen, really appreciate you spending a bit of time giving us an insight into the bigger picture, but also such a well-loved asset. You must have the most photographed bridge possibly in the world when it comes to railways. So can understand you've gone about it the way you have. Alan, thank you so much for your time, and all the best with finishing off Glenfinnan and, of course, everything else you've got to do. Many thanks.
Thanks, Richard. My pleasure.
Well, that was great, Richard. Does it mean he's also responsible for the fourth bridge? Because that really would be one to be responsible for.
Yeah, no, he's responsible for it all. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, if you want to find the place that's got the biggest, the highest, the longest, the deepest, the toughest, the hardest,
the wettest, the most buried in snow, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Scotland
it's
applies.
Extraordinary. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to this week's Railway News Roundup. Loads of action on High Speed 2 this week. We'll come to the Old Oak Station box later on, but also in the news this week is the fact that the Northolt Tunnel is 50% complete. 4 tunnelling machines having now combined to bore 8.4 miles of tunnels. More visibly impressive, though, is that the Colne Valley Viaduct has now made its way across the final set of lakes it will be spanning in the Colne Valley. When complete, it will be more than, wait for this, 1 kilometre longer than the fourth bridge, which we just mentioned.
It is absolutely amazing. I used to drive underneath that when taking one of my kids to and from school. It is superb to see.
Aerial shots of the trains on it is going to be very special.
It's going to be brilliant, isn't it? It's going to be brilliant. The government has published the Passenger Railway Services (open brackets public ownership) close brackets bill, which is the one that makes clear that all railway operations will be coming back into the public sector. It's curious, though, and so we're going to explain a little why a little later.
Mike Putnam is appointed to be acting chair of Network Rail following Peter Hendy's elevation to Minister of State at the DfT, Rail Minister to you and me. The appointment is presumably acting pending a process to find a permanent replacement, and one wonders who would really want that job.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, actually. And in very sad news, actually, this week we learnt of the passing of Sir Kenneth Grange, the legendary industrial designer who, amongst many other things, famously designed the external appearance and interiors of the British Rail high-speed train, the Intercity 125. He passed away at the age of 95, a true legend.
Absolutely. Very sad news. A remarkable man. And that's the news roundup for this week. But a couple of points before we end. First, we have nearly did a fanfare, Richard, then, and decided...
No.
Knowing how you react, I stopped myself in the nick of time.
Excellent.
We've set up a new email address for all our listeners. It's news@greensignals.org, and it's for all of you. I hope we don't regret saying that, Rich. Our listeners to send us, by whom I mean you, bits of news and snippets of information that you pick up from around the railway each week, or that you may see in your local paper that doesn't make it into the national news, which you think could be of wider interest. We can't promise to read all of them out, but the best ones and most interesting ones we certainly will. So that's news@greensignals.org. And we'll always name check whoever sends us an email which we read out. Secondly, Richard, I just want to briefly go back to that HS2 news story and some breaking news in the last 24 hours. The publication of the only word is damning, National Audit Office report into the decision to cancel Phase 2, and it is truly extraordinary.
It is. It was published on the 23rd of July, which is yesterday, because we're recording this on the 24th. So we weren't able to squeeze a good review of this into this program. We already had stacks and stacks of stuff. But nonetheless, this report does lay bare the appalling decision, actually, of last October, when then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak cancelled Phase 2, it would seem without any consultation with anyone who actually knew what they were talking about. You can't read it without getting angry, really. And that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant whatever your view on pro HS2 or anti it, actually, as a piece of process is extraordinary. So there you go.
Indeed. And one phrase memorable which you used there, which will stick in my mind, was without consultation with anyone who knew what they were talking about. I mean, we were consistent about this from the day it happened, wasn't it? That it was sort of cobbled together over the minibar in the Midland Hotel at 2:00 in the morning on the night before the conference. And it really does seem like he did that for some short-term political gain, which he never got anyway, but which the rest of the country will be living with the damaging effects of for decades to come. So next week, we will discuss it in detail. You can say what we think, and we will not hold back. So tune in for that. It's our role to hold those in power to account, feet to the fire, and we'll be doing it. Okay, let's move on to what the not-so-new government is up to now, which has trotted out its first bit of railway legislation, which hit the news this week, with the Passenger Railway Services (Public Ownership) Bill. I know you love this stuff, Richard, so you were all over it like the proverbial rash. But you also found it rather curious, didn't you?
I don't know whether I love it.
Rather curious. Well, you're good at it then.
Well, that's kind.
Better than the quiz.
That's less kind. Right. Okay. Look, I did have a look at this. Remember, those who watch the show regularly will recall that we mentioned this as one of the many, actually. I think there's 5 transport bills. That includes buses and stuff. But in the King's Speech, so I can't remember ever having had that many. What does this one do? Well, it really changes the presumption, I would call it, i.e. that rather than public ownership being the last resort, public ownership will be what we're going to do. When you read it, it's only 4 clauses long, but it's pretty draconian in what I'd call tone. It feels to me as if somebody in the Department for Transport has taken some advice, and that advice is, look, you could get a challenge here from a private owning group, whatever. And so, although 4 nails would have been sufficient to nail the coffin shut, they've decided to use the whole packet. Let's just make sure that it's absolutely clear that that's the case.
Loophole free for a lawyer to wriggle through.
Well, that's very dangerous. I mean,
That's their intention.
That's their intent. You're absolutely right. That's their intent. And there's lots of politics on show here as well.
Oh, I bet.
This is very much about, we said we were going to do it and we really do it and we really mean it. And let's just explain why we really mean it, that kind of stuff. The bit about the curious stuff is there can't be any new franchises or franchise extensions. There is an emergency ability to extend an existing thing, but it's quite tightly defined. But interestingly, it says, in the future, in order to secure the provision of services, there can only be a direct award of a public service contract to a public sector company. And it says that, right? And then it defines what a public sector company is, which is one that is wholly owned by the Secretary of State, the Welsh ministers or the Scottish ministers, jointly owned by them or by the Welsh Secretary of State and the Welsh ministers, and jointly owned by the Secretary of State and Scottish ministers. So
no wriggle room.
Yeah, but the problem is, unless I have misread it, it doesn't deal with things like Mersey Travel, which is not owned by the Secretary of State for Transport. It's owned, it's different. So what does this mean for mayoral ambitions of, world domination and devolution? Now, I can't believe that the drafters have forgotten that. Maybe it will... I know. I actually said those words, right? Maybe it's coming in the rail reform bill later on. I thought it was quite curious. It seems to have been a bit of an oversight. Again, unless I misread it slightly, but I don't think so. But this bill makes it really clear for anybody who had any doubt, the days of franchise train operations are gone. It's quite final, that, isn't it? Right? Never mind.
It is, and we shall wait to see how it proceeds, won't it? So 3 weeks after a Labour win, are we still as positive about what's happening as we were at the outset?
Can I say something controversial?
I would very much welcome it, Richard, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners, let's not forget them, would also be interested to hear.
Not as much as I was, but I hope it's temporary, and I'll explain why. And it all comes down to one thing, which is the creation of the shadow Great British Railways. It's only been 3 weeks, but there's a lot happened in 3 weeks in lots of places, right? So that's one thing.
We've gone to a lot of trouble to explain why franchises can't happen, so they've had time for that.
Yes, and how much of that was pre-planned, of course. Well, a lot of this feels like pre-planned, but in a way, that brings the Great British Railways thing into even more.
Well, there was lots of talk of day one, wasn't there? And the direct in mind and cracking on and all that.
Glad you mentioned that, because I have here Labour's, I think, very good policy from April 25th called Get Britain Moving. And it says Labour's plan for urgent action, making improvements from day one, exactly what you just said. And it says DFT, operator of last resort, OLR Holdings, and Network Rail will be instructed to work closely together from day one of a Labour government on getting the basics right. This will be done through a partnership model with a newly appointed leadership team for a shadow Great British Railways, beginning to bring decisions together and tasked by the Secretary of State with delivering improvements for passengers while primary legislation is progressed. Great British Railways is the ringmaster, and it's supposed to exist from day one.
And there's a vacuum at the minute.
Well, when you actually read what the Secretary of State, who was then obviously the shadow Secretary of State, said in her overview to this document, she said, an incoming Labour government will establish a new arm's-length public body, Great British Railways, which will be a directing mind in charge of Britain's railway infrastructure and services, responsible for the day-to-day operational delivery of the railways, for ensuring infrastructure and services work together, right?
And we welcome that.
And we welcome that. This new structure will end the meddling and interference on operational and industrial relations matters by ministers and Whitehall that has created such confusion and paralysis. Here, spot on.
Where is it?
Is Shadow Great British Railways. I want to be wrong in this slight nervousness concern, but if ministers and officials think that they're the directing mind,
oh God,
they are not. And this document makes it clear that that was never the intention. But the one bit that is missing is the group that is going to pull the operational day-to-day delivery together. So it's fine to, haul in all the operators and Network Rail and give them a good talking to. But where is the body that is going to do this? That's why I've gone from green to double yellow.
All right, so let's hope it's back to green and not a single yellow next week. I think what bothers me is exactly what you've said, and the reason for that is that, yes, it is only 3 weeks, and maybe there is, giving them the benefit of the doubt, it's difficult to do it in 3 weeks. But what we haven't seen, I would have, had it been me or you, we would have made bloody sure from day one that there was signposting. You can expect very soon that we are going to do this, but there's been none of it, has there?
No, and we should be very, I suppose, balanced and careful to say it may be announced tomorrow.
Yeah,
people could be listening to this show on Thursday, the 25th of July, having just heard that it's been announced. In which case, we'll look a bit chumps, but actually great.
And shall we just stress that you and I come at this individually and collectively as Green Signals from a supportive viewpoint? We want this to succeed. We welcomed their plan earlier, and we just want to see a little bit more, if not action on it, some signposting that it's going to be happening. As we said, there's a very strong team with Louise and with ministerial and civil servants, with Alex Hines, with Peter Hendy. They've got some really good brains there. It would be good to see an announcement that Shadow GBR is on its way to get the grip that we both need is needed. Absolutely.
And I mean, I'll probably say this for the rest of my life, right? Ministers and officials together will never, and let me say that again, never make the day-to-day railway operate better and correctly. Only railway professionals suitably challenged,
briefed
with the correct parameters and empowered to deliver will do that.
And with the right budget.
Indeed.
So, please, Louise and team, let's see some action, because we want to say what a great job you're doing. And at the minute, we're a bit anxious, I think is the...
Yeah, anxious is the right word.
We're a bit anxious. Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on?
Let's move on.
This is a really interesting organisation which doesn't have much profile, and that's right, but it's got some fantastic people involved, and I'm talking about the independent rail retailers. We discussed performance earlier and the need to set up Shadow GBR as a matter of priority. Another area, though, where urgent action is required is fares. Not just how much they cost, but how easy they are easy to understand and access and buy. Enter the Independent Rail Retailers Association, the trade association for third-party retailers of rail tickets. There's a clue in the name. And they've just got a new boss. Not only any old new boss either, but Anthony Smith, our old friend of the last couple of decades, the former chief executive of Transport Focus and the boss of various organisations of a similar job which went before, a tremendously experienced public servant who not only knows his way around Whitehall, the DFT and the railway sector, but he loves railways. He really does, and has got some fantastic ideas. So we asked Anthony for his views on rail ticket retailing, the recent debacle within the last government's proposed closure of many booking offices. Do you remember that? It was a big thing once, and we talked about it endlessly, and in the end, we were right again. As well as the challenges and opportunities which lie ahead. So Richard got Anthony on the blower and in front of a camera, and it's fair to say that in addition to being candid and clear as ever, He also said a few surprising things, didn't he? It was an it was an excellent discussion. And here it is. Roll VT, as they say.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined on Green Signals by Anthony Smith, former chief executive of Transport Focus. But Anthony, first of all, welcome. And second,
Hi.
when I say former chief executive, it was actually over an extensive period. Just give us a bit of just remind us just how long you were involved. You must have seen it all.
Yes, well, no, I'm not sure I saw it all, but I became the Director General of the Central Rail Users Consultative Committee in 1999. So by the time I finished last Christmas, I'd done 24 years, and
Wow.
the organisation had been through a huge number of changes. We took on bus, coach and tram passenger representation in 2010. We took on roads in 2015, working with National Highways. Then we had COVID, and then the final kind of swan song was the ticket office closures, which people will remember from last year. So 24 years is a long time, but in that period, it changed a lot.
I mean, you mentioned the ticket office closures. I mean, no discussion with either you or about ticketing could not include that. I mean, looking back at that, what's your sort of, not so much memory of it, but sense of the whole process? Because it did become unbelievably political.
Yeah. It was Transport Focus fundamentally supported the idea of redeploying staff from ticket office windows onto the platform where they're more visible and can be more useful to passengers and do other stuff. So there was no problem with the concept. The difficulty was the process was a kind of a closures process that dated back to British Railways era, which was designed for small changes in ticket office opening hours or one or two stations being shut. It was never designed for a mass closure. And so basically they were trying to ram a huge amount into a process that just wasn't suited to it. And Transport Focus and London Travel Watch's role was very binary. We had to say yes or no to every single one of the station proposals. And so it was just that lack of consultation, that lack of getting stakeholders on board. It turned into an instant oppositional politics issue, which was a real shame. We supported the process. We supported the fundamental thrust of it. Lots of the proposals were quite good. By the time we finished negotiating with the train companies at the end of the 3 months or whatever it was in October, some of the proposals were really good and they were very close to the line, but they were untested. They were sweeping. The concept of the help point, what hadn't been tested with disability groups. Ultimately, we just had to say no to the whole lot. And don't make it very popular, but it was the right decision.
No, and I think people listening to what you've just said there will probably raise an eyebrow a little bit in terms of in terms of the general support to the thrust of the proposals. Because I think one of the comments about it was, yeah, if we're going to do it, we all know the change of mix arguments, and it's very different, and we're in a digital world, but there's still a lot of people that can't use the technology. Why don't you sort out fares and ticketing reform first as a sort of almost like as a model, and then look at ticket office changes? It almost felt like it was kind of cart before the horse.
Yeah, in an ideal world, you would have sorted out fares and ticketing to a point where it was much simpler for people to get the right ticket. Because, for example, we all know if you know what you want, a ticket vending machine is fine. Open, return, click, here you go. If you don't know what you want, it's a nightmare. You go to a person. That's why there are queues at the ticket office windows, and you very rarely get queues at the TVMs. So all that stuff needs to be addressed. But even so, I think the improvements they were promising in the ticket vending machines, the off-station retail they were offering to help people who are unbanked, the training for staff, I think they could have got quite a long way, even with the current ticketing system. But none of it was in place. The funding wasn't in place for it. It was all prospective. It was too risky from our point of view.
And do you think then that with a change of government now, and we'll talk about the politics of the railways in a moment a bit more, but when you listen to what's being said, the change of tone and style is dramatic. Has the whole ticket office thing now kind of almost like gone off the agenda for a generation, or is it going to have to come back, do you think?
No, it'll be back. Richard, one of the things I always remember you saying at the Strategic Rail Authority was you've got two choices: cut costs, increase sales. It's the same for every business, isn't it? The railways have got there is a burning platform, so to speak, in terms of cost.
Yeah.
And no matter how much you take train companies back into public ownership, that's only going to produce a little bit of saving potentially, and it's balanced out partially by the lack of cost control potentially. So it's not exactly like a sort of casino that's suddenly going to produce money for the railway. And as we've seen, change on the railways and workforce reform is painful, difficult, and expensive. And so anything that's going to help reduce costs in the longer term is going to come back on the agenda. And the cost of retail, if it's costing a train company, say 12-13% to sell a ticket at a ticket office window, of the ticket price, that's unsustainable. No supermarket would do that. You've got to think of better ways of doing it, but you've got to take people with you. Consult on the whole idea. Don't try and ram it through this process, because that should have been the end of the process, not the beginning. And it's a shame in some ways, because, what I've heard subsequently is that lots of staff were very keen to go. They were lined up for voluntary redundancy. They were bitterly disappointed when, we said no. And I feel sorry about that, because, for some of those people, those jobs are probably not the most interesting jobs in the world. And that's a shame. They do a good job. But, at my local station, admittedly within London, it's probably very rarely that somebody comes up and asks for something, because generally it's contactless. Beep, 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 beep.
Yeah. What an interest! I mean, that's such an interesting insight. And certainly not a perspective I think we've heard too much about, really. So that, and I'm sure you're right. I mean, 12-13% of cost of sales. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, that is unsustainable. We'll come back to a bit about politics shortly, but I want to just talk about you, because you do nearly 25 years at Transport Focus and its predecessor organisations. The last thing you're involved with is the ticket office, which would have, I suspect, drained most people. You were more than entitled to a little while on the beach, but no, you've ended up going what I would definitely call gamekeeper turned poacher now. I mean, why that? Why independent rail retailers? Just talk about what that is and why that interested you.
Yeah, the independent rail retailers is the trade association for Trainline and the other major non-train company sellers of rail tickets. The reason I chose it was because I looked round and I thought, right, how can I be useful? I'm only 63, got a bit of life left, bit of energy left. How can I be useful? And I love the railways. I absolutely love them. I want more people to use them. I want to be successful. And if they could be run on time, they'd save the planet. So, everything is good about the railways. But I looked around and thought, where can I make a difference? The tracks and the trains are going to be pretty similar over the next few years. There's not going to be a huge amount of change. HS2 will come along eventually. There's going to be a lot of reform discussion. GBR, Great British Railways, is going to take up a lot of energy. And I thought the one sector where you could get on and do something with no government involvement is in retail. How tickets are sold. You don't need to reform the ticketing process. You could just sell them in a much better, more modern way. And everything I learned about the railways over the last 24 years is that if you don't have the private sector involved somewhere in the process, you're losing something very valuable. And I think that's going to be a very interesting discussion later on about public ownership, because at its worst, the private sector involvement made things complex. At its best, it incentivized people to sell more tickets, have happier passengers, and control costs like a normal business. And so the independent rail retailers, the third-party retailers as they're sometimes called, they're private sector, they're exposed. They're perfectly incentivized to sell more tickets, to control costs. What's not to like? So I thought maybe I could make a difference there.
Let's just talk about that private sector, public sector thing for a second, because it's unavoidable now. I mean, we knew the second that Labour produced their Get Britain Moving policy back in April, you could tell where the wind was blowing. We've now had the first piece of legislation draft, which was the Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Bill, right? Which was an inevitable, a bit of kind of enabling stuff to deal with franchises. But if you've had a chance to read it, the language in it is quite draconian. There will not be any franchises. There will not be any private sector train operators. I mean, it's a prohibition, and it's quite strong language. Do you kind of worry that the private sector is a bit of an endangered species now in terms of railway, and that as soon as GBR is set up and it becomes this big thing, actually you might find yourself getting a bit squeezed?
I think there's always that risk when the kind of tectonic plates of any industry shift round, that you can get lifted up, you can also get squashed. And so I think the private sector has got to be very, very alert to what's going on. But I think the government in opposition gave enough signals about the involvement of the private sector to kind of give some encouragement. And of course, we've still got freight, we've still got open access. I think there should be more open access. I think it provides a kind of grit in the oyster, which is really valuable to any system. I think the public ownership system will bring improvements in the planning of the industry, and I think will bring improvements in terms of, ironically, innovation. Because it's interesting, isn't it? It's the most innovative train companies are now the ones in public sector ownership. I mean, you couldn't sort of make it up. It's quite odd. But I suppose because there's a sort of freedom there, they can get on and do stuff. LNER, Northern and others, TransPennine, they're doing really good, interesting, novel stuff. And I think the other thing that public ownership brings, which is really important, is accountability. When we did research on the Williams review with passengers back in 2018 at Transport Focus, people don't care who own bits of the railway. They really don't care. They don't know. They don't care. They want the trains to be on time and value for money. But the one thing people said was what could be improved is accountability. It's not clear who's in charge. And they said the advantage of London, Transport for London, Sadiq, is that Sadiq's making the decisions, he is accountable, he's the person you vote for or not, he's the person that you go and complain to. And I think under public ownership, you're going to get greater accountability. Whether that accountability is with the Secretary of State or whether it's with the chair of Great British Railways is a very interesting moot point.
Interesting whether it's a moot point. I mean, it's quite fascinating again, if you go back to Labour's document, they were very, very clear that ministers would not micromanage, that they would remove what we've seen over the last sort of 10, 15 years and push it back to the industry. It's the one bit of the jigsaw that we've not seen yet. But in terms of ticketing, you do often hear people say it's just too complicated, it's too expensive, but it's certainly too complicated. What can the third-party retailers do to really take a lead on that and not wait for the government or the public sector to actually push innovation? Is there a role there?
Yeah, no, I think there definitely is. I think there's three roles really which the third-party retailers can bring to the party. I think one of them is that at the moment we have this slightly odd situation whereby some ticket products are reserved to train companies or public authorities only. So you get TOC only, you get train company only tickets, you get pay as you go type products, which the third party retailers are not allowed to retail for a whole variety of reasons. That seems very illogical because surely you want to get your products in front of as many customers as possible. And, the third party retailers have a lot of customers, a lot of international customers, which will, Great British Railways is never going to have the reach to get those people, but the retailers do. And secondly, you say it's complicated. It is complicated, but of course, it's the way it's presented is just so confusing. Airline tickets are unimaginably complex, but it doesn't look like that when you look on Skyscanner. It looks pretty simple, doesn't it? And I think the way that third-party retailers think about getting the information to people, making it clear, making the choices clear, is really, really positive. They've got piles of data they sit on about customer purchasing, how they browse, what they look at. There's piles of data about repurchasing, purchasing windows, stuff like that. If you could deploy that data more effectively, I think you could really start to drive sales when you link it to a much better way of booking the tickets. The way you currently interrogate the databases is so crude. I want to go to Edinburgh sort of 12 o'clock on Sunday. It's very narrow. You never get a sort of email saying, why don't you come to Edinburgh for 10 quid next week? The hotel industry, the car hire industry, all those other people now book in a completely different way. And actually, Eurostar do, to their credit, they do this very well. They do push stuff that says, come to Paris for 35 quid. And you think, oh, yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I like that. And so there's an investment needed in these systems to really modernise them. We've got creaking legacy systems that were never designed for the modern retailing world. They need a desperate overhaul.
But Anthony, can you do that without the Department for Transport going, yeah, that's all very interesting, but we're just not ready to do that yet, so you'll have to wait? That is my genuine concern, that our single point of failure hasn't moved.
No, I think that is slightly longer term, that one, but it's a really good aim to have for Great British Railways, is how do you modernise this stuff, and how do you, in a sense, get it into a neutral place where the third-party retailers can invest in it as well. Because the barcode rollout, if you remember, who paid for that? It was the third-party retailers. That they paid for the rollout, for the kit, and got paid back through the operating expenses. And so that's where, you can get private sector money into this industry, into retailing, in an imaginative way, where it really benefits the consumer and it really benefits the taxpayer as well.
So let's get our crystal ball out and sort of pull this all together. And I don't think any of us know exactly how it's going to settle down. So let's just pretend we know. How when you look at the landscape of rail, particularly rail, where do you see the big changes coming? Is it just in retailing, or is it in other areas as well? If we were to look 2 or 3 years down the line, what kind of world do you think we're going to be looking at?
I think probably 2 or 3 things will look and feel a bit different. At a macro level, I think the planning and the innovation that is allowed into the sector, if Great British Railways gets it right, and if the Department and Treasury trust them and sort of say, yep, come back next year, you've got your targets, how you do it's down to you. That's the key thing, is that blue water between the Department and the Treasury and Great British Railways. If that can be achieved, I think there's huge scope for innovation, huge scope for coordinated planning. And that will start to feed through to what passengers want to see, which, of course, is, as we know, it's so simple. Get the trains on time, make them reliable, make them value for money. And if you've got some nice staff as well, that's great. What's not to like? And, there has been a lot of investment on the railways over the last 20 years. And the network, I know the track's a bit creaky in places, but there's a lot of new trains running around. The stations look pretty good. I noticed staff everywhere now are really pretty good by and large. They've been recruited for attitude.
I agree.
They're really good. I don't think the railway's in a bad state, actually. Performance needs to stabilise. But you've got a great product there, which if somebody gets out and sells it in a modern way, we can fill those empty seats, get more people on trains, get people out of cars. It's a win-win, as long as the government can coexist with the private sector in this way. And I think that's going to be a key relationship as to what public ownership actually ultimately means. Public ownership, private delivery, possibly, but there are partners out there like the third-party retailers who are desperate to invest in this industry. It's nice profits, it's not huge profits. Every pound our members gather on behalf of the government, 95p gets handed back to the government straight away. It's a very efficient cost of sale. And if you unleash that sort of ability and capability, you're going to get more revenue. And of course, there's going to have to be cost control. There's going to be painful stuff around staffing and workforce reform, which needs to come. And I hope that doesn't bog everyone down for a decade, because, that change is needed. It's going to come. It could be a bit painful.
Completely agree. Anthony, it's been really, really interesting. It's so lovely to talk to you again. The last sort of serious conversation I suppose we had were different boots on different feet, and you were kind of trying to holding me account, which you did very successfully, by the way. It's so good to hear you in this role, but also with that as a positive outlook for the industry. So all the best with independent rail retailers. You're always welcome on Green Signals to come and talk about exactly this stuff. There's a great future if we can all grab it, isn't it?
Yeah, so I look forward to it. Richard, good to talk to you.
And you. Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Fascinating. Some interesting things Anthony said there, Richard, which I think surprised us both.
I think the biggest one is the fact that he was in favour of the booking office program.
What closure
and I
program?
Yeah, sorry, absolutely. And I rather got the sense he was really saying, right idea, poorly executed, but still right idea, because the cost of retailing for at the moment is still too high. So I thought that was fascinating. But as you know, he's so he is very clear, he's very passionate, and I think he'll be very good for that organisation.
Very compelling, isn't he? And he knows such a lot about it. Highlight of my week coming, isn't it?
Shall we do the quiz?
Hey!
Highlight of your week, honestly, for heaven's sake. Anyway,
like drugs.
Last week's question was a quote. And we asked who said this. Most of all, I love Manchester, the crumbling warehouses, the railway arches. That was our connection to railways. The cheap, abundant drugs. And he actually went on to say in the same quote, I'll just finish this because it is quite relevant. That's what did it in the end. Not the money, not the music, not even the guns. That is my heroic flaw, my excess of civic pride. And it's a brilliant quote from, of course, Tony Wilson, or Anthony Wilson, the founder of Factory Records, one-time Granada News.
He was.
TV
I remember him as a Granada News TV presenter.
Well, that's where he kind of made his name, yeah.
Yeah.
But he was the guy that brought us Joy Division and Happy Mondays and New Order, as well as the Hacienda nightclub.
Legendary Hacienda nightclub.
Legendary.
Did you ever go?
Am I allowed to say that? I'm going to move swiftly on. I think I've just answered the question.
I
right.
didn't.
We can't do him justice here. You've got to kind of read his life story. It's worth a read. By the way, my favourite quote of his, and you'll love this as being a musician as well. Jazz is the last refuge of the untalented. Jazz musicians enjoy themselves more than anyone listening to them does.
You're right. I do
brilliant.
like it. And I would extend that. I mean, I love a bit of the blues, and, you know, it's great fun cycling through a 12 bar, isn't it? And
yeah,
but really fundamentalist blues, I would add that quote. It's so self-indulgent. It's utterly, utterly self-indulgent. And the ones up there with their eyes shut and the audience shaking their heads.
Yeah, but prog rock's indulgent, and I love it. So I don't know. There's something just
you
about
love prog
jazz.
Rock? Were you an Emerson, Lake and Palmer fan?
Yes.
I was.
Big ELP fan.
Anyway,
I think we're going slightly off topic here.
I know, but it's fun, isn't it? I saw him live at Preston Guildhall in 1972.
Well, that's pretty impressive. Anyway,
and yes.
Back to the quiz. So loads and loads of people answered it and got it right. And I do mean loads. And the winner is Alan Dunn.
Well done, Alan.
Yeah. So, Alan, email us again, please, on info@greensignals.org to tell us where you would like your mug sent, and we'll get it on its way to you. So to this week's quiz. One other thing, I'm going to have a rethink of the quiz over the next few weeks. We're going to carry on doing it. It's so popular. It's kind of scary, really. But one of the pains is the internet, of course, so people can go and type in and Google and do. So we're going to have a think about how we can make it a bit harder, a bit more challenging. But for this week, I've got another sort of anagrammy one.
Oh.
Quite like this one, though. On what railway line would I be if I had to accept that my malign dog was a defiler's pet? So, on what railway line would I be if I had to accept that my malign dog was a defiler's pet? If you think you know, you can email us to info@greensignals.org. You can leave a comment on YouTube, but because then everybody sees it. You've got until midday on Saturday, the 27th of July.
Well, that strikes me as maybe a little bit harder than usual, Richard, which means it's going to be around 4 minutes before we see the first right answer.
Yes, you're probably right. Should we have a sweep on that? I think you could well be right.
Oh, God. Anyway, Green Signals mugs, of course, I get one now. Are we run out yet? Are we doing version 2? Because we said we're going to change the design to make them collectible.
No, that's in the works at the moment. No, I've still got. I think we've sent out now. I think we're on about number 33. We've sent out.
Oh, okay.
So, and I think I got 50. So we've still got a few left. But yeah, plan ahead.
Slightly different good news section this week because it comes with a video package and a terrific interview. Last week, we talked about the fantastic milestone that was HS2 completing the Old Oak Common station box excavation. And what a huge feat it was, taking 3 years and excavating 1.3 million tonnes of London clay. Here it comes again, enough to fill 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Who worked that out? Richard was able to speak to HS2's head of delivery for Old Oak Common Station, Sam Clark, to find out more about this huge project. Here's what he said.
I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Clark, who's head of delivery S4 for Old Oak Common for HS2 Limited. Sam, welcome to Green Signals, and that's quite the job title. So just explain what part of the project is your kind of responsibility.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. It's great to be here as well. So I'm head of delivery for Old Oak Common Station. So that's one of the four stations for High Speed 2 that we're building as part of phase 1. So Old Oak Common is one of the London stations. You've then got Euston as well, but ultimately as well, you've got the 2 Birmingham stations, Curzon and Interchange.
But this isn't just any old railway station, is it? I mean, you, in the press release that talked about this the station box being completed, it went much more than that. It talked about a transport super hub. Can you just give us a bit of insight into what that actually means? Why is this so much bigger than just a station?
Yeah, absolutely. So Old Oak Common will be one of the largest UK railway stations. We call it a super hub because actually what it will do is provide unrivaled connectivity for passengers. So we will form as a station an interchange between Great Western Railway, the Elizabeth Line, Heathrow Express, and the High Speed 2 services from London to the West Midlands and beyond. So you could argue we become one of the country's most vital transport hubs and directly connecting the UK's rail network to more than 170 destinations.
Let's just talk about the works themselves and the technical design approach. Now, whilst we're talking, we're able to show a bit of brilliant footage that you guys have done of sort of a time lapse of the station box being built. Can you? I read with interest, fiber reinforced concrete diaphragm. What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the civil engineers listening, they'll certainly know what it means. But fibre reinforced concrete, the diaphragm wall that we've built, so that's a 1.8 kilometre box, which will house the 6 high-speed station platforms where all the trains will run into. So that diaphragm wall is a structural wall, and it simply uses concrete that has been reinforced with fibres to enhance its properties. And effectively, really simply, it stops the ground from collapsing in.
And presumably, Sam, it's as long as it is because there are crossovers as well. It's not, I mean, clearly it's just not just the platforms, is it, within that box length?
That's right. So we've got 400-metre long platforms. So there'll be 6 of those, but actually the box itself is 900 metres long. It's about 20 metres in depth as well. So it's an enormous structure. You think as well, we've got 32,000 tonnes of steel that have built that structure, all assembled and laid by hand by the girls and the guys delivering at Old Oak Common on a daily basis.
Diaphragm wall construction has obviously been used for many projects for many years. Were there any particular challenges of doing this one? Was there a ground condition, or did you find something? Or has it all been just plain sailing?
Yeah, as always, major projects are never plain sailing. The scale of excavation and the scale of the box structure at Old Oak Common has been challenging in itself. Just the sheer size of the box. It's taken a lot of time. You know, we started this work in June 2021, 3 years ago. The footprint itself of Old Oak Common and the site itself that we're building on spans a kilometre. But we pack so much into that really busy site. We've only got one entrance on a local road, and ultimately we're also straddled by railway. So to one side of us, we've got the Elizabeth Line depot, and to the other side, we've got the Great Western Main Line, as it is, as we know today, running live trains on it right now.
I say it's just a station box. You've seen from the pictures, it's extraordinary what it is, but presumably Now we've got a very large hole, so a station needs to be put into it. What's the timescale and process for that now?
Absolutely. I mean, it's significant in itself, but we've still got a hell of a lot to do in terms of the program of work. So the next steps for us in building the high-speed part of the station is that we will now complete a lot of the substructure works that are below ground. So pouring glaze slabs, infilling intermediate slabs, closing the tops up, ready for the high-speed 2 platforms that come in later this year. Not to
Oh,
mention, that's all about the high-speed station. We've also got the conventional station where you've got the Elizabeth Line, the Great Western, and the Heathrow Express. So we're currently building the platforms, 6 of the 8 platforms we're currently building right now. Beyond that, we've still got to build the vast roof structure, 4 football-sized fields worth of roof structure alone that goes over the
wow.
station. Not to mention all of the cabling, the lighting, the systems that come with that to enable us to run a service.
Gosh, sounds like you're going to be kept very busy for quite some time. One of the lovely things about HS2 is the number of jobs that have been created for graduates and apprenticeships. Just talk a little bit about that. How many of those folks have been able to be involved in this particular project?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. And Miguel was, I think, smile beaming across his face the day when we did the golden shovel movement, and rightly so. Construction, we've got to encourage young people to come into engineering and construction in particular. Major projects like High Speed 2 are the perfect platform to give those young people those opportunities. I myself came through a graduate program, and we've seen lots of apprentices come through HS2, which, as you said, are 1,500, which is really exciting. On Old Oak Common, we've had 110 apprentices, of which 27 of those have come from the local boroughs. So again, that's really important for us. That's about a legacy that we're leaving in West London, but importantly, it's the legacy that HS2 is trying to build and leave for the future generations.
Absolutely. Well, look, the images are superb. So congratulations on getting to this critical milestone, Sam, and all the very best for the rest of the project. There's still a load to do, but it sounds like you got it well in hand. So good luck with that, and thank you.
No, thank you, Richard.
So there we go. No mention of how many double-decker buses, but
Yeah, no, sorry about that. But that time lapse is brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's the size of the thing. It is absolutely mind-bending, really. So well done, them.
And sadly, because Richard and I love sitting here blathering away to each other about trains and politics and anything else, prog rock this week, that's going to be a good one. And thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, or if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel on YouTube and on your various audio podcasts. We don't forget our listeners as well as our viewers. And do join us again next week. That's the most important thing. We'll be out and about over the next few weeks, making the most of the longer days, shooting some terrific video and content for the show. We've got trips planned to GCRE, the Global Centre of Rail Excellence, formerly known as the Onllwyn Washery, the Network Rail New Measurement Train, and a trip on one of Britain's most spectacular freight trains. It's a rough job, but somebody's got to do it. Guess who's doing that one?
Me.
That's going to be a cracker. But you've got to keep tuned in to find out where and when. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And thanks for being with us. See you next week.